Did you know that waiting until the end of the IEP or ARD meeting to bring up the topic of inclusion is a big mistake? You don't want to ignore the I in the room. You want to instead start building inclusion into your IEP at the very beginning. So I'm excited because we're going to be doing this new topic. Also, I'll be presenting this in more in depth as a breakout session at PEAK's upcoming Inclusive Education Conference in Denver. So a shout out to all my friends that will be at the PEAK's Inclusion Conference. If you don't know me, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, an advocate that is like passionate about our kids being included. And I welcome you to our show. Please know that even if you're watching the replay, type in your comments and questions because I'll come back and we'll talk about them. So welcome, say hi so I can say hi to you. We are going to be looking at IEPs kind of, I don't know, maybe with a new lens. Because what I see is there are so many opportunities throughout that IEP form and throughout the IEP process where we can build in the whole concept of inclusion. And believe me, this makes it so much easier when you get at the end of the meeting and you're talking about what would be the least restrictive, environment or placement. So if your child has an IEP, let me know. Also, maybe how old your child is. And as we go through today's workshop, please give me examples of something that's, going on with your child as far as their IEP and maybe some questions that you might have. And we will get to those. It's a lot more fun when we're interactive. So I appreciate you guys for being here. Karen is here. Hey, Karen. Renee from near Chicago. Renee's a advocate in Illinois. So if you live in Illinois and you need an advocate. So as I said, we're going to be talking about how you can embed inclusion. And so let me see here. We're going to start off with this cartoon from Michael Giangreco. And it says, placement of a child with a disability in a general ed classroom is not enough to be included. It's just a foot in the door. And how true is that, right? And sometimes, it feels like that's all our kids are getting. They're kind of getting their foot in the door, but they're not really being supported and really learning in the general ed classroom. So we don't want them just to have this presence there. We want them actually to be engaged with all the other students in the class. So let's go back because I have another great cartoon. I like Michael Giangreco. This is The Island in the Mainstream, and you may have seen this. This is one of his most famous ones, I think. It says, Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Cooper are still trying to figure out why Fred doesn't feel like part of the class. And there's Fred sitting at the back of the room, the island in the mainstream, with most likely a paraeducator sitting across from him, totally isolated from the other kids in the class. So that doesn't meet my definition. Oops, and was I even showing it? I guess I wasn't showing it. It'd help if I would show it. That doesn't meet my definition, and I'm sure doesn't meet your definition of inclusion either. So we're going to, because of time, we're going to pick out certain parts of the IEP that I think sometimes people forget, like this is a good place where we could talk about inclusion. So these are some of the specific areas we're going to touch on today. For sure, present levels of academic achievement, functional performance, sometimes just known as present levels. This is the foundation of your child's IEP. this is an excellent place for you to start embedding inclusion. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's see. The annual IEP goals. This is a perfect place to build in inclusion into the actual IEP goal. We'll also be talking about accommodations. This is a place that you want to connect what your child's strengths are and how they learn best. And we want that captured in accommodations. And we can also embed inclusion in those. And we'll give some examples. Services and supports, obviously, where, how much time your child's going to be in general ed versus the special ed room. And then finally, that all leads to that least restrictive environment, the LRE, the placement that you're going to be talking about at the end of your IEP meeting. So we're going to start with present levels, number one, because that's our foundation. In present levels, there's lots of components, and because we just have limited time, we're going to talk about two components of present levels. We're going to talk about the student strengths, preferences, and interests, and also the student needs and the impact of disability statement that you see in IEPs. So think about some strengths that your child has and type them in the comments for us, because we're going to be using those strengths and we're going to be kind of building on it throughout the IEP. So go ahead and take a minute here and type in some strengths that your child has, and then we're going to show how you can build on that. Hey, Marlene. So type your strengths. I know there's a little bit of a delay. Sandra, hey, she's from Pennsylvania, and she has a 12-year-old seventh grader with Down syndrome. And are you working for Disability Rights Pennsylvania, Sandra? How cool. Thanks for being here. All right, we got some strengths coming in. Nancy says, compassionate, wants to socialize. Cool. Michelle, how you doing? She says her son's strengths are great at mimicking what he sees. Yes, I see it's a common theme here, right? Hey, Cheryl, she says good judgment. That's a neat strength to think about. Marla from Downright Capable. Great personality, loves to socialize with others. Yes. So we're going to look at those strengths, and we want to make sure that those are actually written in the IEP. So many times parents, hear how they have to have input. They should, be bringing their concerns and suggestions to the IEP team, but they're not really sure how to get that embedded in the IEP. So one of my suggestions is, as parents, you make a list ahead of time before the meeting of your child's strengths. Shirley Swope, a good friend of mine who is a parent advisor at Peak Parent Center, she has a great idea where you just put an index card, piece of paper on your refrigerator. Whenever you think of it, you go add a strength to that list. And you bring that. Ideally, you would email that ahead of time so people would have that and they could, just copy and paste it into the IEP. But you want those strengths written down. You don't, sometimes what I see when I go to meetings is, the parent starts talking about their child's strengths, how they learn best, and everybody's just kind of like, yes, nodding their head. But nobody's writing it down. It's like, no, this is important stuff. We're going to build on this. Let's get this written into the IEP. Jessica, hey, Jessica, she says, following the routines of a classroom. I mean, that is like a very wonderful strength that teachers love, right? Fanny says, loves art and technology and is very organized. Ooh, that's cool. And Renee says, my son's processed advanced knowledge regarding certain topics. Possessed. My son's possessed advanced knowledge regarding certain topics. Teachers told them to be quiet. Ugh. Caring, loving, independent, and self-learners due to being homeschooled K through 3. So thanks, Renee. So think of those strengths. And then the other thing that we want to do with strengths is we want people to connect those strengths to strategies. So if I know, Fanny, that your child loves technology, art, and is very organized, if I know that as a teacher, how is that going to help me? How can I connect with a strength to how am I going to use this in the classroom? And that kind of connection is what we need to be talking about at IEP meetings. The strengths box is not there just to be nice. I don't think so. It's there to inform us of what we're going to build on. So, for instance, Fanny's child loves art, technology, and is very organized. So maybe, and Fanny, I don't know how old your child is, a class is writing a class book about famous presidents. And maybe your child is the one that gets to be one of the illustrators of the book, right? Or maybe with technology, your child knows enough that they're going to be a peer mentor to someone else in the class or someone younger and help them learn how to use their Chromebook. So your child would be placed in that position of, I have something to give others, right? So think about how we're going to connect those strengths to actual strategies. The other thing that I love to connect strengths with is to accommodations. Strengths are a wonderful way for you to figure out what are going to be accommodations to make it easier for your child to learn in the class. So keep your comments and questions coming. I love it. I'm glad you guys are here. I'm going to go back over here to our slides, but I got to share it. So this is what we talked about. Or, we talk about strengths, but also the IDEA law says we need to look at your child's preference and also interests. So here's an example. The student loves to read out loud to younger children. So a strategy could be to give that child time to go down to the kindergarten class and read a class story to the kindergarten kids twice a week. So this is a kind of, brainstorming I would like to see happen. And sometimes IEP meetings are so rushed that we don't get time to really discuss. It's more like fill in the boxes. So one strategy that you can try is to have an informal meeting with members of the IEP team ahead of time and start looking at strengths and how it can tie into strategies. So you get that time to talk to the teacher about it, and they start connecting the dots between strengths and strategies. So what do you think? Let me know if you've got any questions coming up. And I need to advance. Here's a different one. The student's strength is they learn how to do new things by watching other people. And several of you had mentioned something similar to that, right? So work with classmates in the general ed classroom to learn new skills. So that's where you're going to start building and putting inclusion into even the strengths section of the IEP. Now we're going to go to the needs section, and here the IEP goals are usually based on student needs. So well-written needs are really critical in order to have inclusive goals. So instead of what happens sometimes is like it's just the needs like reads like this laundry list of all the things that your kid can't do. And so what I like to do is look at our goals, our values for our child to be included in general education, and how can we embed that in the needs section. So let's look over here, and I'll give you some examples. First, if you can share some of your child's needs in the boxes, and then what we're going to try and do, oops, what happened? I lost myself. What we're going to do is, again, use some examples that you give us. What are some needs that your child has? And then we're going to look at how we can phrase that in order to embed that inclusion part. Okay, so you just type in the needs, and then we'll brainstorm how to make them more inclusive. And I think I lost my PowerPoint, so I'm going to, while you're typing in needs, I'm going to go grab my PowerPoint again. It disappeared. Huh. So we need the Jeopardy music or something, right? So type in what your child's needs are, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint. I'm going to find the PowerPoint. Do, 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 do. Let's see which one. This one. Okay. Shoot. I don't know how we're going to do this. It's not cooperating. There we go. Okay, are you writing in your needs? Sorry, I'm having like this technology. Okay, share screen. So let's look at some of the needs. So Nancy says, help with communication to build their vocabulary. Oops, I didn't share that one. Sandra says, needs social skills and pragmatic language. Yep, that's. Michelle says, needs are getting all the amazing ideas in his head out onto the paper. Cool. She says, Renee, we will wait. We are learning important information. Thank you. Verbal output from Fanny. Expressive language. A profoundly deaf child with developmental disabilities and extreme medical isn't a fix for the local school, I think. Hey, Lauren. So we're going to take those needs that you wrote in here, and we're going to figure out how can we add some words, take away some words to make those needs more inclusive, or to make it so it starts building on the inclusion that we want. So I'm going to give you a couple examples, and then we're going to brainstorm some ways that you can change what you wrote in there for needs to make it better for the end result of having your child being included. So let's go back here. So this is a need, and it says David needs to be with typical age peers in the general education classroom in order to increase his communication skills in natural environments. So look at this. I mean, this is, like, I don't know, suggested language, that would apply for a lot of your children. And you can make it more specific depending on your child. But look at how you could use something like this instead of just saying he needs, to work on, expressive language or something. That we embed in that need is that he needs to be with typical peers in the general ed classroom in order to work on that communication skill, because we want him using it in natural environments, right? Not just like in the therapy room. So I have another example here. Yolanda needs a communication device that is programmed so she can demonstrate what she has learned and for social communication with her peers in the 5th grade general education classroom. So it sounds like a mouthful, right? But this is, these are just like samples, ideas, examples. You can craft the language how it's best for your child. But look at this. It's not just, my daughter needs a communication device to use at school. Because, she could be in the special ed room all day and using a communication device, and it's like, good, that's what we wanted. But instead, the big picture is I want my daughter to be able to communicate with her device when she's in the general ed room so she can show her teacher what she's learned, so she can have these natural conversations with her typical peers. And that's going to all be happening in those natural places, in the lunchroom, in the classroom, things like that. So does this give you some ideas on maybe how you could tweak the wording of your child's needs to embed inclusion? So let's see what you guys think. If you want to give some more sample language down here in the comments, that'd be great. Michelle says, yes, great present levels. I know, it's like so cool to think of just that tweak, right? And also I wanted to share, if you guys want to get the show notes from today and additional resources, then just give us a show notes in the chat box. And next Tuesday morning, I'll send out an email with the show notes from today, but also additional resources for you to learn more about inclusive IEPs, because there's some good articles and research out there. So I want to share that with you too. So just type in the phrase show notes. And the other thing is, if you know somebody that could be using this information, you can hit that button and make it go out into the universe. So let's go back to comments and see what we have. So Nancy says, where can we go to find more qualities to help with strengths? That's a good question. Sometimes you can like Google a synonym, like I do that, like what's a synonym for outgoing, or, and just through Google, you can go to a page and it will list all kinds of other synonyms for that. Or you can say, I think you can even do a Google search for like positive qualities of a person, and you'll get a list of words that you can use. And then the other hint that I have as far as finding qualities of your child so you can think of more strengths are talk to other people. Because often, if your child is in, a park and rec baseball league or whatever, you can talk to the baseball coach about what do you see as are some of my son's strengths. And, we've had situations where T-ball coaches have said, your child is the best about heads up when I've got some new direction to give. He's looking at me, he's listening, and he goes and he does it. And it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So it doesn't have to necessarily be one adjective that's going to describe your child's strengths. But sometimes sharing a short story like that and then writing down that my son, does pay attention very, closely when others are giving directions and he's able to follow 3-step directions or whatever. But you want to try to get information from other people, from grandparents, from neighbors, from your kids' friends, your kid themselves. What a concept. Brothers and sisters. So it's really interesting when you start gathering information and you ask other people that know your child, what do you see as some of my child's strengths? Ask last year's teacher. So yeah, that would be really helpful. So let's go back here. Let me go back to comments and see some of your needs and how we could rewrite those. Yeah, so Nancy was talking about the expressive language. So that's the one where, the communication needs with typical peers in the general ed classroom. That could be something that you add on to that. So you're starting to build inclusion into the IEP, right? So let's carry on here because our show is kind of full with content today. Next, we're going to look at the disability impact statement. So sometimes it's not even really noticeable, I guess. On some IEPs, it's written, it's typed in there, but I don't think we necessarily pay that much attention to it. So what I suggest is that we think about that disability impact statement. And instead of saying things like, because he's on the autism spectrum, he has difficulty engaging in conversations, understanding others' perspectives, and, kind of this laundry list of things he can't do again. Instead, I want us to look at the disability impact statement in a new way. So let me show you some examples. So here's one. Actually, this is more general information, sorry. We want to make sure that any disability impact statement isn't used to justify the segregation of students. And that's sometimes what it feels like to me when I read those. It's like such a, story of so many things that people are building their case for your child to be in a segregated special ed class. But look at how his disability impacts him in all these negative ways, versus disability can impact all of us in positive ways too. And we can get our chance here to start building some more inclusion into the IEP. So let me show you how that works. What you want to do when you're wording these is to talk about the impact of your child's disability, but also how those needs can be met in the general ed classroom or when participating in extracurricular activities. So I look at that impact statement, but we also want to connect some things of why they can be met in the general ed classroom. So here's one from Marco. Marco's challenges with communicating with same-age peers and generalizing skills outside of the therapy room require language supports in the general education classroom. So do you see, we recognize that he's got challenges in communication. Yes, we recognize that it's hard for him to generalize skills from what he's learned one-on-one with a speech therapist in a therapy room to actually using it in the general ed classroom with his friends. And so that's a much more, positive, inclusive way to frame the disability impact statement. Now, I will tell you, if you start talking about this, they are going to look at you like, what is this mom talking about? Because that's not the frame of mind that most teachers have when they see disability impact statement. They think about all the, the skills that your child can't do right now. And for some reason, use that as a reason to justify for your child to not be in the general ed classroom very much. And so what you're going to be doing if you want to rephrase those disability impact statements is you're going to be creating this kind of, confusion or, something that's not going to go over well with the teachers. So you have to realize that all of this is kind of taking baby steps. And it's also something that you can have a conversation with teachers before the IEP meeting and say, when we write this IEP this year, I would love for us to really look at how we can phrase that disability impact statement so it captures what my child could do when they're supported in the classroom, even with this impact of their disability. So you're going to have to help teachers along to see that there's another lens that they can use when they're writing these kinds of, statements in your child's present level. Okie dokie. So let me check and see. I'm going to bring this back up. And I'll give you another example. Emily's difficulties with organizational skills can cause her to forget to turn in completed assignments. She benefits from daily check-ins at the beginning of the day and her first period general ed class to review her checklists and put completed work in the appropriate place. Now, just reading that, right, it sounds like that's a lot to think about. And people like to just have short phrases on IEP forms. So again, you have to realize that you're going to get pushback when you're trying to build more inclusion into your child's IEP. And you have to be okay with that, and you have to be prepared for that. So that's just a word of caution. Whenever we are creating change, right? Not everybody's going to be excited about looking at IEPs in a more inclusive way. So just realize that. So let me know, do you have any aha moments about, Charmaine, you're even telling me how we should rewrite this disability impact statement. Never thought of that. What else are you guys thinking? Yes. Type in show notes and we'll get those emailed out to you next Tuesday. Who else has a comment? What do you think? Hey, Lissa. Lissa's from Idaho. Sandra, let's see. She says, don't say easily distracted. Right away, they want to separate. Yeah. There are more distractions in non-general ed classes. Yes, very good point, Sandra. And Julie Costin has an article about, when you think about your child going to the special ed resource room and you think, oh, they're going to get this small group or one-on-one instruction from the certified teacher. It's going to be calm, quiet. And usually there's several different things happening in the resource room. And there are a lot of distractions, just like Sandra said. So if you'd like that article from Julie Costin, let me know and I can give you the link for it. It's good to have in your back pocket sometimes. And Nancy says, crazy how a couple words changed makes a big difference. Wow, I know. And that's what we want to do is a couple words at a time. We want to change that IEP so we can get more inclusive ones. So let's carry on here. And let me go back here. So another Michael Giangreco cartoon. They're having Chinese dinner. They're going through the fortune cookies. And the one friend says, "Don't you think that's enough? We have something to do." And the other friend is opening up all these multiple fortune cookies. "I'm going to keep opening fortune cookies until I get one that says, 'Your child will be appropriately supported in general education.'" Well, the caption on the cartoon says, "Not so ancient inclusive proverb. Take action. Persistence overcomes resistance." Yeah, and I'm sure that's probably a lesson that you all can identify with as far as the need to be persistent, right? Okay, so we got more to go here. I got to speed up my talk. We're going to be looking at annual goals next, so hang on. This also is an important foundational part of your child's IEP, which I'm sure you are aware of. Hopefully, you don't have an extreme team. The staff is sitting around a table and they're saying, "Are we all here? Where do my goals go?" Somebody else says, "Are we ready to staple our parts together?" And somebody else says, "Who's going to tell the parents what we decided?" No, that's not what we want. Instead, we want you to have the dream team. Oh, look at this. Pleasantly seated around a round table. Are we agreed upon these common goals? And somebody else is like, "Yes, let's wrap it up by reviewing accomplishments and processing, Joanne. Thanks for bringing the snacks." Somebody else at the table says, "I'll share this with the rest of my family." And the other person says, "At our next meeting, let's continue with our adaptation planning." That's the dream team that you want. Now, take a picture of this slide or jot it down real fast. These are phrases that you can use to make your goals more inclusive. So like how Nancy was saying, we can just change a few words. So you can add on to your goal with support of peers in inclusive settings. Or you could use while working in the general ed classroom. Another phrase you could use would be small group instruction will be provided in the general education classroom. And the last example of a phrase that you could add to goals is the child will interact and participate in cooperative learning groups in the general education classroom. So these are things that make it a little easier to kind of ease into the whole idea that we're going to start putting inclusive environments into the goals. And let's look at some examples here. So Marla, I was on Marla's Downright Capable show earlier today, and she was talking about this annual goal template that I have. So this, to me, I think because I'm a real linear thinker, is really helpful. To me, these are the important, components that we want to have in a measurable annual goal. Of course, it's going to be who is going to do what with what materials, given how much time, how much support, what's the degree of accuracy that we want, and then this is the key one here, in what environments. In what environments, when you add that to your IEP goal is going to be more inclusive. And then you say for how many times, and then you've got a measurable IEP goal. So I'm going to pause here for a minute, let this sink in. And catch up on comments because I want you guys being part of our conversation. So let's see. Marla and Maureen said, Julie Costin article. Yeah, I'll give you guys that link afterwards. And Lauren says, it was interesting how the same child with the same needs IEP can be written from two completely different perspectives. I would add that when reading an IEP with more inclusive language can empower the T, I'm not sure what you mean there, to see solutions versus focusing all the problems. Yes, yes. So did you mean empower the teacher? Yeah, I mean, and it's changing that lens that you use and changing from that deficit medical model that so many teachers were like educated with into changing it into a more inclusive type of model. And let's see what Karen says. We're having so much trouble getting her son's needs met that I'm looking into getting a teaching license and going back to school for a master's in special education. Well, there you go, Karen. I think you would be an excellent teacher. And so, yeah, we need more teachers out there. That's for sure. Renee says, I completely understand. I have a master's in laws and important topics aren't discussed. I became an advocate. Yeah. Marla, this is her favorite template. And it showed up again. So that's pretty cool. Sandra, why are schools reluctant to write peers in to help with a goal? Or how can we reduce the reluctance? That's an excellent question, Sandra, because you do get that pushback. A lot of times they'll say, well, we can't assign somebody else to be working with your child. I mean, what would their parents say? And no, we need to get permission to do something like that. And instead of looking at how natural peer supports can be a benefit to all kids in the class, and it goes back to that concept of, when you have to teach someone a skill or a concept, you learn it better. So you can approach it from that point. But yeah, and sometimes you need to have that discussion many times before you'll kind of reach some kind of agreement, right? But, as parents, I think that you always have that right to request something like having peer support in the classroom. And if the district is in disagreement, then we've already talked about it and there's probably not a way that we're going to come together, then I just say, well, please put that in their prior written notice so I can read, what you considered, how you made that decision. But yeah, it's that and like naming certain curriculum, there's all kinds of little things that will be red flags for school people and they won't want to put that in there. And instead, I think we need to have those conversations about the benefits of peer support and get them to understand why we're asking for that, and not that, we're going to make every other kid in the classroom a teacher, or he's going to be assigned every Monday to have to do something with my child, but that it's more of a natural ebb and flow. And that should be how it is with all the kids in the class, not just your child with, the IEP. So let's look. Lisa says, I just now got an email from the special ed teacher. They want to meet for the IEP meeting Tuesday. So Lisa, in our Trailblazer group, because Lisa's a Trailblazer, we've got our Q&A tonight. See if you can come on live, because we want to get a lot of prep done before Tuesday, right? I know. And Lisa also says, that's interesting, Sandra. In the past, I balked at peers helping with the goal. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, that's why IEPs are individualized, right? So, yeah. And Laura says, how do you include a homebound student? We have a VGO robot, but the teachers do not use it. Previously, they used it 3 times a week to interact with peers, observe lessons, participate in projects. How cool is that, Laura? So, you need to go back to the IEP and see what's written in the IEP. If it's not written in the IEP for it to be used 3 times a week for these different subjects or whatever, you need that written in the IEP, because the IEP is what you can hold them accountable. So that would be my short answer. Sandra says, love your answer. Thank you. You sounded just like them. And Laura adds, there's no IEP requirement for use. It just states that the district will provide support. Yeah, so that's that generic language. That's a huge loophole that the school doesn't have to. I mean, you would think, right, after they purchased it, that they would want to use it. So then also you have to look at what is kind of the underlying reason that they're not using it. Is it because the teacher feels like she doesn't have the skills to like figure out how to turn it on, how to get it focused, how to get it so it's going to move right? So it might be that technology part. So then you can write in the IEP for staff training on using the robot, right, to eliminate that fear. Or is it a fear from the classroom teacher, like, I don't want people looking at me and watching what I'm doing, and, or like, oh, I feel like I have to do hair and makeup now when I go into the classroom. So find out through discussions with the people, why is it that they're reluctant to use it? You're just curious, and see then how you can address it. But really, if it's not, like Pete Wright says, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So you can look at the needs, right, that your child needs to be able to have time through technology, and you can list the robot if you want, to be able to participate in class discussions, to see lessons, start building it in your needs. Make sure you put it in the goal that, given the VGO robot, the student will do XYZ. So build that into the IEP throughout each section of the IEP. Does that make sense? So let's carry on here. So here's an example of a goal using that template. And I turned this video into a podcast, so I'm going to go ahead and read the slide. It says, Jason will read aloud a story from his 2nd grade basal reader, given 20 minutes with no more than 3 verbal prompts with 90% accuracy in his 2nd grade classroom for 5 consecutive days. So see how we added that environment in his 2nd grade classroom, because he could be reading a 2nd grade basal and do all these other things, and that could be happening in the special ed room. So you want to put the environment in there. Now, just like everything else, you're going to get pushback. So be prepared for pushback, because they're going to say, we don't want to decide on where the placement is yet. We haven't even talked about that. We're only writing goals. And that's true. However, you can also point out, most likely in a speech language goal or an occupational therapy goal, they have written in their goal that this will happen in and I forget how they say it, like a structured, therapy environment or something. But they define what their place is that they're going to be working with your child. So if those are the kinds of goals that the team has already accepted, then to me, it makes sense that when we're looking at academic goals, that we also look at the ultimate goal that we have is that this child is going to be doing this in the general ed classroom. And that is part of our goal because we want the child learning this with their classmates. So I think there's another example here. So this is for a high school student, and she's in a biology class. So we break it out into who will do what, with what materials, given how much time, with how much support, with what degree of accuracy, and what environments for how many times. And this is what it looks like. Suzanne will match 5 previously selected biology words to the correct photograph in 10 minutes, given 5 index cards with the vocabulary words and 6 index cards with photographs. She will do this with 1 verbal prompt with 80% accuracy in her 10th grade biology class for 3 consecutive biology units. Now, that goal is going to look pretty different than goals that they're used to writing. So you're going to be the trailblazer and trying to help teachers see there's another way that we can write annual goals and that they can be more measurable. So let me know. I can give you the PDF of this template if you'd like that. So let me know in the comments. And then also, like I said, just type in show notes in the comments and I can get you set up. My IEP bot will talk with you and we'll get you signed up so you'll get the email on Tuesday morning. Show notes and extra resources about how to write inclusive IEPs. Alrighty, so let's carry on. So Marla has a question. She said, what if your child does pullouts for reading? There really isn't a way to incorporate inclusion like second grade classroom, correct? Well, I mean, he could get pulled out for, specially designed reading instruction. But you also might have this ultimate goal of that your child would be able to sit, with one of his, 6th grade classmates or 2nd grade classmates, and to be able to read a book, to be able to talk about, the main idea, I don't know, some reading comprehension things. And your specially designed instruction can be those short-term objectives of how your child is going to get there. But the end goal, the big goal should be that, your child can be a capable reader in those natural general ed settings. And like I said, that can be a combination of pull-out instruction, but when he's back in the classroom, look at ways that he can generalize those reading skills he's working on and show that he can use them in the general ed classroom. Because that's at a higher level than using skills when you're in a one-on-one instruction situation in a special ed room. So let me know, Marla, if that makes sense. Okie dokie. And we're going to move on. We're moving. Oh, a little cartoon break. 2 people here sitting at the computer. The first one says, Tom's IEP is due soon. What should we do? And the other person says, no sweat. I've saved every IEP I've written over the past 15 years. Pick one and we'll go from there. And this caption says, recycling gone bad. Yeah, they've forgotten what that I means, right, in the IEP. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay, we're moving up. We're going to talk about accommodations next. So to me, accommodations remove the barriers by changing how a student is learning. Now, most of you probably know we have accommodations and some students also have modifications. Today, because we have a little bit of time, we're only going to be talking about accommodations. But to me, the key word that I always like to remember for accommodations is it changes how the child is learning, how they're showing us what they know, versus a modification changes what the student is learning. The complexity, the detail is usually not there when some work is modified. But we're going to talk about accommodations. So generally, you can look at 9 different categories of accommodations. Today, we're just going to look at 4. So a presentation accommodation goes along with what the teacher is going to, or how the teacher is going to be teaching the lesson. Is it going to be, interactive? Is it going to be read the chapter, answer the questions? So we're going to look at presentation accommodations. We're going to look at response accommodations, what your child does to show the teacher what they learned, setting accommodations, the environment, and then organization, just because I know that affects a lot of kids. So let's dive in here. My tip, when you're writing a list of accommodations in the IEP, is to categorize them. You can categorize them by presentation, response, the setting, organization. It's easier for staff to remember and more likely will be implemented if you categorize the accommodations. So that's my sidebar tip. So we're going to look back at strengths and strategies and how we're going to connect those to accommodations. So think about some of the strengths. If you were with us at the beginning of the show, what were some of your child's strengths? And we're going to look at how we can connect that to accommodations. Oops. Okay, I'm going to pause because I have some real life examples to show you. So let's look here. So I pulled some things. I have, just from different workshops that I do, I have kind of a variety of stuff I collect. So let's pretend that your child's strength is that they can do well when they write short summaries. It's not a long essay. They're not the long essay kid. They're the short summary kid. So if their strength is writing short, concise summaries, one of the accommodations could be, can you see this? That they use something similar to this, and you just describe it. They don't have to go buy this exact Post-it note, but you could say something like, the accommodation is using sticky notes. The child will summarize that, one page of, the science textbook or whatever. So using something like this can be a great accommodation. It's also engaging. It's more than just like writing your summary on a piece of paper or typing it on the computer. It's a way that the child can stick it right there in the book, but without writing on the book, right? So if your child has a strength of summarizing, then think about how can I use that as an accommodation in their IEP. Let's say your child has a strength of being able to use visual cues, picture cues. And so you think, well, that's a strength, he's a real visual learner, but how can I use that as an accommodation? Well, here's an example. This is something that I made, decades ago. And I think I saw it later in a teacher's catalog, so I didn't get it trademarked. But what it is, can you see it? I made this for my reading groups where it would remind the kids of different strategies. So like the tree says, match the word to the picture, sound it out for the snake, different things like that. And then I was like super creative and I put this colored paper there. So if the kids wanted to use this as a marker when they were reading, But if your child is a visual learner, then one accommodation could be that they have a card with visual reminders of their reading strategies that they can use. So take a strength that your child has, connect it to an accommodation, and write that in the IEP. Okay, here's another example. So your child's strength is that they can read and understand so much better when the font is larger, when there's a lot of white around the words, right? So this is a dictionary. Now, this dictionary might not be the dictionary that everyone uses in the class, but if it's a good match for your child and how they learn, then this can be written in as an accommodation. And so I actually used this dictionary when I was a second grade teacher. So do you see it's got room to write new words? It's larger font. There's more white around it. But anyway, the whole idea is whatever your child does well, think about how they learn best, and then think about, we could write this in as an accommodation. Like when I was on Marla and Brian's show today, Downright Capable, we were talking about using groups of objects when kids are learning multiplication. And it's like, yes. And then that's a perfect thing to write in the accommodations to make sure that your child has math manipulatives that are interesting to them that they want to use. So again, just all those little things can really add up. And Michelle says, could you include the bookmark with the reading comprehension techniques on it? Yeah, you know what I could probably do is take a picture of it and I can post it in the group. Good idea. And Nancy says, what if the problem is schools always wanting level at 70% instead of 90%? This is what affects us for inclusion. Student is in self-contained. So are you saying that so when you say the level at 70%, are you talking about the goals for accuracy at 70%, or are you talking about inclusion for 70%? So let me note, Nancy. But yeah, if your child is in a self-contained room and is in there pretty much the whole day, it's going to take more persistence in order to get that change, because it's really challenging, I'll be honest, when somebody is in a self-contained room to then convince the team in the school that your child really can learn in a more inclusive environment. Okay, Nancy said accuracy. So yeah, it's like, ask them why. I mean, they're probably picking 70% because they're saying, oh, that's like an average score or something. And then there's always the joke, I'm sure you've probably heard about, the IEP goal was to cross the street safely 80% of the time. And it's like, what? So it's okay if he doesn't cross the street safely 20% of the time. So there are some goals that you're not going to accept less than 100%, right? Especially when it comes to safety kinds of things. And so I would just try to ask them why they're kind of stuck on that 70% for accuracy. And, would it change if the goal was different? Would then they, think, yeah, he could probably do this goal at 90%? Do they use 70% for every single goal in the IEP? Or, so I would have a conversation about why they chose the 70%. So let's go back here. So yeah, think about the strengths, think about how they could actually become accommodations. So let's move on up to the next section in the IEP that we're going to talk about, services and supports. So of course, right, this is how much time he's going to get learning different things from who, where in the building. Again, you want to make sure you're building in inclusion and that the general ed environment is checked and that your child has the opportunity to get supports brought to him versus just having pullouts. There was a court case, Bronker, talking about how special ed services and supports are portable and they can be brought to the student. So you've probably heard that expression of, special education is a service, not a place. So they can pick up all their wonderful materials and go to the general ed classroom and co-teach. I mean, that's ideally what would be happening is we would have more co-teaching occurring in classrooms throughout the school. And that would be a best practice way for your child to be included and supported while they're in the general ed classroom. So one of the things that you can look at is to include some indirect service time in inclusive IEPs. And you can look at how can we write in some time for, I think you need weekly consultation between the special educator, the general ed teacher, and related service providers. And you need to have this time written in that grid or in the optional service statement. And this actually was something that Julie Costin talked about, I don't know, a couple summers ago. I had her and Paula Kluth on my show, and we talked about co-teaching. And Julie was saying, if parents think it's worthwhile, maybe take some of those direct service time minutes from your child's IEP and group it together, to have some indirect consult time actually written in the IEP. And then you also want to be specific in that optional statement of service delivery about how that, what that general ed and special ed consult is going to, what that time is going to look like each week. But it's unrealistic for us to think that our kids are going to be supported without time for teachers to talk. And being a teacher, a retired teacher, I know how important that planning time is, and we have to figure out a way to give that to teachers if our kids are going to be successful. This is another famous one of Michael Giangreco's cartoons. So it says, very snowy day. The custodian most likely is outside shoveling the steps. And the person in the wheelchair is saying, could you please shovel the ramp? And the custodian says, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I'll clear the ramp for you. And the person in the wheelchair is saying, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. So I want you to remember that clearing a path for people with special needs, let's cross that off and say disabilities or disabled people, clears the path for everyone. And that, in essence, is what inclusion is about. When we change what we're doing for somebody who's on an IEP, chances are there's other children in that general ed classroom that could use that same change. So as much as possible, we want to see our kids being supported and learning every day beside their general ed peers. So let me know what other comments you have. And guess what? I forgot. I almost forgot. Where's my celebration thing here? Because it's my 150th Facebook Live video. 150 of these. So instead of some small giveaways, I'm going to go big, and we're going to give one person 150 days of free membership in our Trailblazer group, which is for parents. So let me do this before I forget. I'm going to close my eyes. This is the high-tech way to do it. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to scroll through, land on somebody, and whoever's comment that I land on, you will be the lucky winner of 150 days, which is what, 30, 60, 90, 5 months. 5 months of free membership. Woohoo! Lisa, you are already in our group. Okay, let me close my eyes. Woohoo! And I'm going to open them. Lauren! Lauren is from Colorado, and I think I'm going to see her at the Peak Conference. Lauren, if you're still here with us live, send me a private message, and I will get you set up to join our private membership group called the Parent Trailblazers. How exciting. And because it's my 150th show, we're going to do 150 days of membership. So how cool is that? Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. It was kind of a lot of content. But I wanted to share this with you because I think it is something that we can do. I love if you would give more examples in the comments and questions. The more that we share, the more that we brainstorm, the better we get at speaking up for our kids, right? And I just want to thank you for being a part of our show and being out there speaking up for your child every day. I know. It's not easy some days, but we just got to keep on keeping on, right? Next week, I will be in Denver, Colorado, actually doing a breakout session similar to this. So we won't have a live show next week, but the following week, we will be back. So thanks for being here and take care, and we shall see you again.